There's a question few people dare to ask out loud. Why, after 60, do many people feel a strange spiritual emptiness? Even if they've had a successful life, it's not just the body changing, nor the relationships evolving. It's something deeper, a kind of disconnection from the invisible, a loss of meaning that can't always be explained in words. Yet it's there silent, showing up at dawn, in long stares into the mirror, or in those moments when one wonders, is this all? But what if I told you that this feeling isn't the end, but the beginning of a new stage? That there are 9 spiritual habits capable not only of healing that emptiness, but of transforming you radically from within, giving you back not who you were, but who you are meant to be in this new phase. It doesn't matter if you're 60, 70, or 80, the soul can rejuvenate. These habits are deeply inspired by the legacy of Jacobo Grinberg, a scientist and mystic who studied how consciousness, the neural field, and perception can open us to transcendent well-being. For Grinberg, the universe isn't a physical place, but a mirror of what's within. And when we change within, everything changes outside. If you're here, it's because you feel there's still something to discover. And there is. Subscribe if you believe the soul also ages, but can rejuvenate. Because you're about to remember what your heart already knew. That spirituality has no age, but it does have callings. And this could be one of them. Throughout life, many people build a sort of inner map, a way of interpreting what they live, a more or less stable structure from which they navigate experiences, relationships, losses, and certainties. But that map doesn't always reflect the real territory. Often it's filled with projections, conditionings, old wounds, or inherited beliefs. After the age of 60, when the external pace begins to slow and the noise of social expectations starts to fade, many people face, for the first time, the deep content of their inner map. And what they find doesn't always satisfy them. Some discover they've lived following someone else's routes. Others realize what they thought were certainties were barely shaky constructions that no longer sustain them. This is when the first habit becomes crucial, reconstructing perception with expanded awareness. Jacobo Grinberg said that reality isn't something that exists out there, but a phenomenon created in the interaction between the human neural field and the quantum field of information he called the lattice. In other words, what we perceive as reality is a translation, and that translation depends on the state of our consciousness. If the neural field is conditioned by fear, unresolved past, or a linear vision of time, then the perception of reality will be narrow, repetitive, full of blocks. But if we manage to expand that field, open it to new forms of experience, then perception changes, and with it everything else changes. Reconstructing perception means stopping living on autopilot. It involves interrupting the inner narrative that tells us who we are, what's possible and what's not. At 60 or older, this habit is especially powerful because it activates a stage of life where we're no longer so bound to productive urgencies. There's more silence, more room to observe, and also more need for meaning. Expanded awareness allows us to start noticing details that once went unnoticed. How we talk to ourselves internally, what emotions lie behind our reactions, what family patterns we repeat without realizing, what kind of energy we generate in the spaces we inhabit. This broader view is the first step to a new well-being, one that doesn't depend on the external, but on the quality of our perception. Grinberg proposed a key idea in his synergy theory. The more coherent the neural field is, the more capacity we have to modify perceptual experience. This isn't just a spiritual hypothesis, but a basis for concrete practices. That's why this first habit isn't something abstract. It has a practical application that can be exercised every day, what we'll call the Alternative Reality Journal. This practice consists of dedicating at least 5 minutes daily to describing an everyday scene, a conversation, a walk, a meal, as if it had been lived from a higher state of consciousness. The idea isn't to lie or create naive fantasy, but to train the brain to broaden its interpretive capacity. If you argue with someone, for example, you can write how that conversation would have gone if you had been present from empathy, from deep listening, or from detachment. If you felt loneliness or emptiness during the day, you can imagine how that same moment would have felt if you had perceived the silence as presence, not as absence. This journal, written honestly but with expansive intention, slowly retrains a perceptual system. What's important here isn't to create a false reality, but to begin exiting determinism. One of the great spiritual challenges after 60 is a temptation to say, I'm like this. This has always happened to me. At my age, I won't change anymore. But that only means the inner map has hardened. And when the map becomes rigid, it stops guiding. Expanded awareness, on the other hand, returns our capacity for surprise, flexibility, and continuous transformation. Grinberg expressed it by saying that true power is not in controlling reality, but in actively participating in its co-creation. For that, we need to stop seeing the mind as just a file of memories and start seeing it as a laboratory of consciousness. Reconstructing perception is reorganizing the inner ingredients with which we cook our daily experience. If we change the ingredients, meaning the emotions, beliefs, and intentions, the outcome also changes. This habit also involves a special kind of attention. It's not about observing everything with judgment or analysis, but about practicing what some call objectless attention, an open, sustained presence where one simply perceives without labeling. At 60, this kind of attention is more accessible than ever because life's rhythm allows more pauses, more contemplation. Instead of resisting moments of loneliness or boredom, we can turn them into fertile spaces for this expanded perception. In fact, many great sages, mystics, and meditators from different traditions began their deepest practices at older ages, when the world's clamor no longer distracted them as much. The body slows down, but consciousness becomes more subtle. At this point, it's important to distinguish between expanded perception and superficial positive thinking. It's not about seeing everything nicely, but about opening the layers of reality that were hidden by mental automatism. You can be living a real difficulty, a disease, a loss, a conflict, and still cultivate a more conscious perception of what's happening within you. That perception doesn't deny the pain, but it goes through it with more understanding. For example, someone who lived for decades in the role of caregiver may discover, by expanding their perception, that many of their decisions were driven by the fear of not being needed. That revelation doesn't erase the past, but it allows a new meaning, and that is deep healing. Grinberg stated that consciousness is holographic. Each part contains a whole. This means at any moment, no matter how insignificant it may seem, can become a gateway to the transcendent. All it takes is a willing perception. When one starts to live from this key, even preparing tea can become a ritual connection. Walking becomes a conversation with space. Reading a book ceases to be just information and becomes synchronicity. This kind of perception is not magical. It can be trained, and the more it's trained, the more stable it becomes. Even in the face of physical pain, uncertainty, or the loss of loved ones, expanded awareness allows the experience not to be reduced to suffering. There is something beyond, and that something beyond becomes more accessible as perception refines. By reconstructing our inner map from this consciousness, our identity also changes. We no longer define ourselves just by name, profession, age, or achievements, but by the quality of our presence. And that presence, though silent, becomes transformative for those around us. Sometimes without saying anything, just by being. This is one of the most beautiful gifts of cultivating this first habit. We become a source of peace, clarity, and meaning for others, and that at this stage of life is perhaps the highest form of spiritual service. It's not necessary to do great things to reconstruct perception. Small daily acts of presence, writing, listening, and observing are enough. What matters is consistency. As Grinberg said, the neural field responds more to repetition than to intensity. That is, it's better to exercise perception every day for 5 minutes than to do it once for an hour. Over time, this practice literally reshapes the way the brain processes information. And then, without realizing it, you begin to live from another place, a more serene, more connected, more loving place. Thus begins a new inner map, not as an escape from the past, but as a rewriting of the present. From expanded awareness, we can see our life as a tapestry where every thread, even those that seem broken, has a place in the design. And when we see the whole design, something appears that is not just understanding, but gratitude. Because we understand that everything we lived, even the hard parts, brought us to this point. And from here, from this new perception, we can begin again. At any age, at any time. But how do we sustain this perception in a body that already begins to ache, to limit itself, to change? As we age, the body starts speaking in different ways. It no longer responds as quickly or endures the same demands. There are days when it feels heavier, slower, even more fragile. And yet, in that very fragility, a dimension begins to reveal itself, one that for years may have gone unnoticed. The body as a sacred space, not in the superficial sense of aesthetic worship or physical performance, but as a place where the deepest part of our being resides and expresses itself. At this stage of life, the body stops being a tool for doing and becomes a channel for being. And in that transition, breath reveals itself as one of the most transformative practices. That's why the second habit is conscious breathing as silent prayer. Breath has been with us since the very first moment. It is the first gesture of life and also the last, but we rarely pay attention to it. We breathe reflexively without noticing. However, conscious breathing is one of the oldest and most powerful keys to connect with the present. In many spiritual traditions, breath is seen as a bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world. It is the only physiological function that can be automatic or voluntary, and that makes it a privileged tool to influence the internal state. Jacobo Grinberg, although he didn't focus exclusively on breathing techniques, deeply understood this connection. His idea that consciousness could alter the structure of the neuronal field finds in breathing one of its purest expressions. Breathing consciously is to modify the energetic frequency of our body and mind. After 60 years of age, the body often asks for rest, attention, and care. It no longer tolerates excesses or abuses that once went unnoticed. This new sensitivity is an opportunity, not a limitation. The body becomes a much finer, more delicate, more receptive instrument, and that makes it ideal for subtle practices like conscious breathing. This habit requires no strength or flexibility, only presence, only a loving willingness to inhabit the body just as it is, without judging it, without resisting its rhythm. Practicing conscious breathing is not the same as doing complex breathing exercises. It's not about imposing artificial rhythms or forcing the body, but about remembering that we are alive. It's about pausing during the day, at least 3 or 4 times, and taking 3 deep, slow breaths with attention focused only on that act. While inhaling, feel how the air enters and fills the body. While exhaling, notice how the accumulated tension is released. There's no need to do anything else. No visualizing, no repeating mantras, no trying to empty the mind. Just breathing consciously. That simple act is a form of wordless prayer, a form of direct connection with the present, with oneself, and with life as it is. When this habit is integrated into daily life, something changes in a silent but irreversible way. Automatism softens. Impulsive reactions become less frequent. Emotions settle more gently. And most importantly, one begins to experience a kind of presence that doesn't depend on what's happening outside. Breathing consciously turns any moment into sacred space. It can happen in the middle of a hard conversation, during a quiet walk, or even upon waking. There's no need to create an ideal context. It's enough to remember that the breath is always there, available, ready to support us. In Grinberg's view, the body is not just a collection of organs and tissues. It is an energetic web that responds to the state of consciousness. This means that when we breathe consciously, we not only oxygenate the body, we also reorganize the neuronal field. In other words, we directly influence how we perceive and experience reality. A person who breathes shallowly and restlessly tends to live from anxiety, fragmentation, urgency. On the other hand, a person who breathes slowly and deeply accesses an internal state of greater coherence, presence, and clarity, and that, in turn, transforms the way they relate to the world. This habit also has a profound impact on the nervous system. Conscious breathing activates the parasympathetic system, responsible for relaxation, regeneration, and digestion. In older age, when the body needs more support to stay in balance, this activation is an invaluable gift. It's not only about feeling calmer, but about facilitating internal processes of healing, emotional stabilization, and general well-being. Even some physical ailments that seem inevitable can ease or shift when the body is supported by harmonious breathing. One of the most beautiful aspects of this habit is that it requires no prior learning or special conditions. Anyone can begin at any moment. All that's needed is a decision to be present in one's own body. Breathing consciously is also a form of reconciliation. Many people reach 60 with a history of bodily disconnection. They have lived more in the mind than in the body. They have ignored signals, demanded too much, repressed physical emotions. This stage is an invitation to return to the body, not through control, but through listening. And breath is the language that makes that return possible. When this habit is practiced regularly, one discovers that the body is not an enemy or a burden, but a silent ally. Every cell breathes with you. Every organ responds to your presence. Even physical pain, when observed with attentive breathing, transforms. It may still hurt, yes, but it no longer feels like a threat, but like a message, and that completely changes how life is experienced. Conscious breathing turns a body into a temple not through idealization, but through direct experience. One realizes that with each inhale, life enters, and with each exhale, death is released. Every breathing cycle is a reminder of impermanence and, at the same time, of eternity. At this stage of life, breath also becomes a bridge to the invisible. Many older men and women find that their outer world has shrunk. Fewer activities, fewer stimuli, fewer presences. But that external emptying can open the door to a deeper perception of the inner world. Breathing consciously is a way of crossing that threshold without fear. It's a way of opening up to the subtle, to what can't be seen but can be felt. Often, by breathing attentively, one can perceive the presence of loved ones who are no longer physically here, or gain access to an intuition that once felt distant. It is not magic or hallucination. It is expanded sensitivity. It is consciousness beginning to inhabit every corner of the body. A simple but powerful practice is to sit in silence for 5 minutes, eyes closed, just observing the breath. At first, it may seem boring or hard. The mind wanders, the body grows restless. But if one persists kindly, something changes. One begins to feel an inner space that doesn't depend on thought, a silence that is not emptiness, but fullness, and that experience transforms. Even if brief, even if lasting just a few seconds, it leaves a mark in the field of consciousness. And little by little, that state begins to seep into the rest of the day. Conscious breathing also helps in moving through intense emotions. When there's sadness, anger, nostalgia, or uncertainty, the natural tendency is to react or resist. But if, in that moment, a pause can be made and breathing becomes attentive, the emotion finds space to unfold without taking over. It's not about repressing or controlling, but allowing the emotion to express within a container of presence. And that is exactly what conscious breathing does. It turns us into that container, a safe space where everything can be felt without being denied or unnecessarily amplified. This habit, over time, becomes a kind of wordless prayer, a way of giving thanks, of asking, of letting go, of surrendering. Nothing must be said. Nothing must be thought. Just breathe. And in that breath, the body becomes altar. Each inhalation is an offering of life. Each exhalation is an act of trust, and that in itself is embodied spirituality, not as theory, but as direct experience. As a truth that is felt beyond all explanation, conscious breathing also transforms the relationship with the surroundings. One begins to walk differently, to speak differently, to eat differently, because everything becomes slower, more present, more real. Even relationships benefit. Listening to someone while breathing consciously completely changes the quality of the encounter. One no longer listens just to reply, but to understand. One is no longer with another from need, but from presence, and that in old age is a gift offered effortlessly. Thus, this second habit becomes a foundation upon which a deep and lasting well-being can be built. It's not about avoiding aging, but living it with dignity, with presence, and with meaning. Breath doesn't take away years, but gives life back to every moment. And that is the true gift. Now that the body begins to show its limits, it also reveals its power. And breath is a key that allows entry into that subtle temple where the physical and spiritual embrace. There's no need to understand everything. It's enough to pause, close the eyes, and breathe. The rest comes on its own. Do you remember any time in your life when simply breathing saved you from a dark thought, a rushed decision, a pain that felt unbearable? Tell me below, and if you're starting to become aware of your breath, write in the comments. Today I breathe with purpose. Perhaps your story and your phrase are just what someone needs to read today. Let's continue with the third habit. In our Western culture, spirituality has, for centuries, been hijacked by dogmatic structures. The search for the divine has been confused with the fulfillment of rules, obedience to authority figures, and a repetition of practices that, over time, have lost connection with inner experience. Many people, upon reaching 60, feel a silent sense of betrayal. They dedicated decades to religious practices, to beliefs imposed from outside, and yet they find no real comfort when facing life's great questions. Death, the meaning of what's been lived, the ultimate purpose, seem more blurred than ever. And it is at that point where true spirituality begins, one that needs no temples, no creeds, no hierarchies. Jacobo Grinberg understood this with striking clarity. In his critique of institutional religion, he pointed out that much of human suffering comes from the disconnection between the direct experience of consciousness and inherited mental systems. For Grinberg, the sacred was not in dogmas, but in the direct experience of the infinite. He didn't believe in a personified God, but in a field of consciousness that could be explored from within. And one of the most powerful tools for that journey was meditation, but not as it is taught in many commercial or superficial spiritual settings. Grinberg spoke of a meditation that didn't aim to add anything, but to remove, to empty, to silence, to dismantle the ego so that the neuronal field could connect with subtler dimensions of reality. Meditating to empty rather than to fill involves a total reversal of the approach many adopt at the start. Instead of asking, "What will I gain from this practice?" the essential question becomes, "What am I willing to let go of?" It's about stopping the search for elevated states, mental images, pleasurable sensations, or quick answers. It's letting go of using meditation as another spiritual consumer product, like someone going to a soul spa in search of relaxation. That's not it. It's deeper. It's radical. It's allowing the mental construction we call self to be dismantled so that something vaster can emerge. When Grinberg researched the neuronal field, he observed that synaptic configurations were not static. Our brain is designed to adapt, to mutate, to reconfigure itself in contact with the invisible. What he called the synergic field was a deep-level reality interwoven with our perceptions, our inner states, and our intentions. In that framework, meditation is not just a tool for relaxation, but a revolutionary act. Every time you sit in silence, you're not doing nothing. You are reprogramming your field. You're opening a portal through which the unknown can seep into your experience. But for that, you must empty. You must be willing to leave behind the need to control what happens in that inner space. In practice, meditating to empty means observing without clinging, sitting in silence, and, when a thought arises, recognizing it without judgment and letting it go, not trying to understand it, or change it, or use it to build a narrative. Just let it pass, as if your consciousness were a sky and thoughts clouds that come and go. It also means not seeking spectacular, spiritual experiences. Many people, influenced by New Age ideas or grandiose discourse, think meditation should lead them to see lights, hear voices, or experience mystical visions. But that expectation is another ego trap, another way to fill the inner space. In fact, Grinberg warned about the dangers of spiritual self-deception. When the mind wants to fabricate transcendent experiences to feel special or superior, that's not expansion of consciousness. It's ego sophistication. That's why one of the most valuable exercises we can do, especially after 60, is to practice what he called silent listening. A form of meditation where no mantra is repeated, no object is visualized, no specific breathing technique is followed. One simply listens, listening to the world, the body, the thoughts, distant sounds, listening without intention, without direction, without goal. It is the total surrender to the present moment. And over time, that listen becomes more refined, more precise. One begins to notice the micro movements of the mind, the subtle emotions floating beneath the surface, the bodily sensations that previously went unnoticed. And then something begins to happen. One is no longer just in eye observing, but the very space of observation. That is the door Grinberg wanted to open. Many people, upon reaching an older age, feel uncomfortable with silence. They're used to noise, to the TV on, to the radio, to conversations filling the gaps. But that discomfort is precisely a sign. Silence unsettles the ego because it threatens to dismantle it. The practice of emptying through meditation is an act of courage. It is sitting face to face with oneself without masks. And yes, at first it can hurt. Old memories may emerge, repressed emotions, unanswered questions. But right there is where deep healing begins. Because it's not about eliminating any of that, but about allowing it to express without resistance. As Grinberg would say, when consciousness expands, reality transforms. And to expand consciousness, one must create space. Space without content. Space without intention. The paradox is that the more empty you are inside, the more you connect with what's essential. And that emptiness is not absence. It is pure presence. It is not denial, but openness. Many mystical traditions agree on this, that the void is the matrix of everything. The Tao, Nirvana, Ein Sof, Shunyata, different names for the same state of being where the real reveals itself. But it's not necessary to study comparative religion to experience it. It's enough to close your eyes, release expectations, and stay there, breathing, listening, feeling. Day after day, even if nothing happens, even if it seems useless, even if the ego screams that you're wasting time. Because in that silent, invisible, imperceptible practice to the outer world, you are reconfiguring your neuronal field. You are allowing original consciousness to emerge. For those who've lived decades in service of others, fulfilling roles, responsibilities, family, or work duties, meditation can be the first genuine experience of freedom, because it's the only space where no one tells you what to do, what to think, how to be, where you don't have to prove anything, nor justify anything. Just be. Be with yourself. Be with what inhabits you. And in that being, little by little, a deep compassion opens up, a tenderness for yourself, for your wounds, for your mistakes, for your story. And from that tenderness, the soul begins to heal. Grinberg intuited that the human being is not just a set of biochemical processes, but a bridge between dimensions, and the bridge is strengthened in silence. That's why meditation is not an isolated act. It's an internal revolution, a way of telling the universe, I'm ready to stop pretending. And when one empties oneself, something very strange happens. You no longer need so much. You no longer desire so much. You no longer fear so much. You begin to live from another frequency. Simpler, slower, brighter. Not because everything is perfect, but because you stop fighting what is. Meditating empty is not a technique. It's a disposition, a way of being in the world. And that is no age. In fact, there's a wisdom that only arrives after 60, when one has lived enough to know the answers aren't in the noise. That what important can't be bought, bragged about, or hoarded. It's only listened to, in the depth of silence, at the center of the void. After learning to empty oneself inwardly through silence, we arrive at one of the most revealing dimensions of the spiritual path, the relationship with others. Because while it's true that inner awakening begins in the intimacy of being, it is also in connection with others that the depth of our consciousness is most profoundly tested and reflected. Here emerges a fourth habit, cultivating energetically conscious relationships, a habit that becomes a cornerstone of well-being after 60. When masks begin to fall, relationships are reduced to the essential, and the soul yearns for true connections, not imposed commitments or empty habits. Jacobo Grinberg maintained that human relationships are projections of our mental and emotional configurations, energy fields in constant exchange. From his neuronal field model, he understood that each person lives not only in a physical universe, but in a subjective reality built from thoughts, emotions, memories, and perceptions. When two people meet, they do not touch only in the visible, but their fields intertwine in the invisible. That's why a relationship can be healing or destructive, expansive or limiting, depending on the degree of consciousness with which it's cultivated. At this age, many people have already experienced many kinds of bonds. Long marriages, friendships that fade over time, unresolved family conflicts, painful losses, romantic disappointments, or moments of deep connection. But what is rarely taught is that every relationship is an opportunity for self-recognition, to remember who we are at our core. We didn't come into this world to live in emotional isolation, nor to suffer in unconscious relationships. We came to look at ourselves in the mirror of the other, and in doing so, discover parts of ourselves we wouldn't otherwise see. Cultivating energetically conscious relationships begins by assuming radical responsibility, recognizing that what we attract or tolerate in our relationships is closely related to our inner state. If we repeat conflictive bonds, if we constantly feel ignored or betrayed, if we give more than we receive, it's not just bad luck or wrong people. Often, they are unhealed patterns that continue to project. And at 60 or older, it's time to stop repeating those stories. Not out of exhaustion, but out of clarity. Because consciousness allows us to choose from another place. An energetically conscious bond is not based on need, but on choice. It's a connection where both people accompany each other without trying to possess, support without depending, love without manipulating. For that, it is vital that each one takes on the task of observing their energy field. How do I come into this relationship? With what expectations? With what wounds? With what ghosts in the past? Am I seeing the other as they truly are, or through the filter of my lack? These questions, though uncomfortable, are the beginning of relational awakening. And Grinberg intuited this when studying how attention modifies the structure of reality. The way we look at the other, what we project onto them, what we expect, what we fear, all of that shapes the kind of relationship we co-create. Many times, it is believed that conscious relationships are those without conflicts, where everything flows and harmony reigns. But that is a false ideal. Conscious bonds are not perfect. They are true. In them, there is space for error, for misunderstanding, for difference, but also for listening, responsibility, deep forgiveness. Because when a relationship is lived from soul energy and not from the reactive mind, even conflict becomes a teacher. Even pain becomes a portal for expansion. One of the most revealing aspects of this habit is learning to read what is not said, to catch the subtle. Grinberg spoke of expanded perception as a quality that awakens when we silence mental noise. And it's from that perception that we begin to notice how certain people drain or lift us, how certain environments tense or soften us, how certain words, even without offensive intent, can impact our energy field like small blows. This level of sensitivity is not weakness. It is embodied wisdom. It is the ability to choose bonds that nourish, that respect our limits, that honor our process. After 60, this discernment becomes essential. We are no longer here for half-hearted relationships, for friendships out of obligation, for dinners where one smiles politely while the soul shrinks. Life invites us to surround ourselves with people who vibrate at our same frequency, who can keep silence without discomfort, who share without imposing, who embrace without absorbing. Sometimes, this involves making difficult decisions, letting go of bonds that no longer resonate, setting boundaries where we once stayed silent, stepping away from dynamics that dim our light. But every time we do, something realigns within, because we are saying yes to our energetic integrity. And that is priceless. Cultivating conscious bonds also means opening up to new forms of connection. Many older people believe there's no time to make new friends, to fall in love again, to build tribe. But that's just a limiting belief. Age doesn't close doors. It opens them with more discernment. When someone has done the inner work, they attract relationships from a different place, not from the need to be seen or approved, but from the authenticity of one who knows themselves. And that authenticity is magnetic. Because few things are as beautiful as an elder who shows up just as they are, with no defenses, no strategies, no rush. Someone who has stopped pretending and started being. Furthermore, by practicing this habit, one begins to heal generations. Many of the relational patterns we carry are inherited. Family stories, unspoken traumas, invisible mandates. When a person chooses to relate from consciousness, they break chains. They become an example. They become medicine. Whether with children, grandchildren, friends, or a partner, their very presence begins to elevate the vibrational field around them, because they no longer react from a wound, but from wisdom. They no longer impose, they listen. They no longer judge, they understand. And that transforms everything. One of the most powerful exercises to integrate this habit is to review our current bonds with energetic awareness, to sit in silence. Think of each significant person in our life and ask, what do I feel in my body when I think of this relationship? What part of me is activated? Does this connection uplift me, ground me, bring peace, or drain me, confuse me, unsettle me? It's not about blaming the other, but taking responsibility for our vibration. Sometimes it's enough to adjust a dynamic, to speak from the soul, to open a space for true listening. Other times, distance is needed, but the essential thing is not to keep living relationships on autopilot, because at this stage of life, the soul no longer wants noise. It wants truth. Grinberg said that when two neuronal fields intertwine through consciousness, they create a third field, a shared energy space that transcends both individuals. And that field is where true relational alchemy happens. There, creativity is born, mutual inspiration, collective growth. It's the kind of bond where one not only feels accompanied, but expanded, where one can talk about the everyday and also about the transcendent, where there is space to laugh, cry, sit in silence, share a cup of tea, or watch the sunset together without needing to fill the space with words. That is the new quality of relationship we are called to. Not perfect, but conscious. As one matures, it becomes clear that the most important things in life are not achievements, possessions, or recognition. They are relationships, the people who touched our soul, the moments of shared presence, the conversations that revealed truths, the hugs that held us when everything seemed to fall apart. That's why cultivating energetically conscious relationships is not a luxury. It is a soul necessity. It's a way to restore dignity to our connections, to treat them as sacred temples, not as emotional transactions. It doesn't matter how many times we've failed in the past, how many relationships we've lost, or how much pain we've carried. We can always begin again. We can always raise the vibration of the bond. And for that, the other person doesn't have to change. It's enough for us to change how we look, how we listen, how we are present. Because when we change, everything changes. Reality reorganizes itself. And life, generous with those who awaken, begins to bring us people who reflect our new inner state. Just as we learn to care for our body as a temple and our mind as a channel of perception, we also learn to care for our relationships as gardens. Gardens that need attention, authenticity, tenderness, honesty. Gardens where not everything blooms immediately, but where each seed sown with conscious love bears fruit sooner or later. And in those fruits, many times we find the greatest gift, feeling deeply accompanied, seen, loved, not for what we do, nor for what we give, but for what we are when we relate from the soul. Now tell me, have you ever felt that a relationship broke you, but also revealed who you really are? Write in the comments a phrase that describes that bond or what you learned. If you dare, name it. This space is a mirror. What you share may be someone else's healing. After exploring how our relationships can harmonize or disharmonize the field of consciousness, we reach an essential need to maintain that balance, to create rituals that support our inner state. Here arises a fifth habit, a practice that distinguishes those who live by inertia from those who live with intention, creating personal rituals of connection. We are not talking about empty routines, nor mechanical actions repeated day after day without soul. We are talking about conscious gestures, symbolic acts that organize our energy and anchor us in the sacred. The difference between a routine and a ritual lies in presence. When you brush your teeth each morning, thinking about what you have to do afterward, you're in a routine. But if each morning you light a candle with the purpose of remembering who you are beyond the body, you are in a ritual. The external action may seem simple, but the inner charge is profoundly different. Jacobo Grinberg suggested it indirectly when speaking of the neuronal field and its plasticity. When we repeat meaningful experiences with an expanded awareness approach, our brain and neuronal field begin to weave new energy patterns, new ways of perception, new paths to the invisible. Ritual then becomes a tool for perceptual transformation. When ancestors performed dances, chants, offerings, or ritual baths, they didn't do it out of superstition, but because they knew that each act, if filled with intention and symbolism, modifies the internal state and connects it with subtler planes. In modern life, we've lost much of that, and after 60, when many external structures fade, work, social roles, even certain relationships, it becomes urgent to establish new inner structures that hold us. And rituals are exactly that, internal structures of meaning. One of the most powerful rituals you can create is the morning ritual of connection. It doesn't have to last an hour or follow strict rules. What matters is that you design it yourself, with elements that mean something to you. It can begin simply upon waking. Before getting up, place one hand on your heart and the other on your abdomen and softly say a phrase like, "I am here. I am presence. I open to the mystery of the day." Then you can light a white candle, drink an infusion that represents clarity, read a few lines from a spiritual text, or simply remain in silence for a few minutes, watching the light enter through the window. What matters is not what you do, but how you do it. If you become aware that each gesture is planting a state, you are ritualizing your existence. Grinberg spoke of how the neuronal field can resonate with other fields and dimensions. Ritual is an antenna for that resonance. If each day you create a moment where you align, where you give direction to your energy, where you communicate to feel that you are available, then your life begins to fill with synchronicities, intuitions, and perceptions that once seemed random. Some people, when starting these practices, notice they remember their dreams more, unexpected answers appear, more refined emotions arise. It's not magic, it's tuning. It's like changing the dial on a radio. The message was always there, but you weren't on the right frequency. Another powerful ritual is nightly gratitude. Before sleeping, you can light a small lamp or place your hands over your chest and softly recall 3 moments from the day for which you feel grateful. It doesn't matter whether they were major achievements or tiny details like a stranger's smile, the aroma of coffee, or the silence of pause. What you do with this gesture is reprogram your field to perceive the positive, the harmonious, the valuable. It's a way to prepare the unconscious for sleep. And Grinberg highlighted the power of pre-dream states as channels of access to the deep unconscious and to other planes of consciousness. You can also integrate the 4 elements as the basis for your rituals. Fire, for example, through a candle that represents inner light, transformation. Water, with a small bowl or a glass that symbolizes emotional fluidity, energetic cleansing, connection with the subtle. Earth, through a stone, a plant, or even walking barefoot each morning for a few minutes to reconnect with stability and presence. And the air, through the conscious use of breath, incense, or simply opening the window and letting the wind in. These elements are not decorative. They are living forces that, when invoked with intention, activate forgotten parts of our perception. Ancestral wisdom and Grinberg's vision converge in this understanding. The environment is not a backdrop. It is a mirror of the internal. And if in your environment you create altars, symbolic spaces, sacred actions, you're educating your neuronal field to live from a higher frequency. Creating rituals can also help you let go of the past and open to the future. There are closure rituals that serve to say goodbye to relationships, stages, or stagnant emotions. Writing a letter that you then burn, bearing a stone that represents an old pain, releasing flowers in a river, while naming what you are leaving behind. These acts, if done with presence, are not childish games. They are micro acts of power. The symbolic brain understands a message. The field registers it, and life begins to flow in new directions. There are also opening rituals, where you can write your intention for a new cycle, plant a seed while softly speaking your wishes, or simply stay in silence, facing the sunrise, letting your soul express what it needs. When you do this, you are assuming your role as co-creator of your reality. You don't need to belong to any religion or follow dogmas to create your own rituals. In fact, one of Grinberg's great contributions was freeing spirituality from rigid structures and returning it to the realm of direct experience. Your rituals are yours. They may seem strange to others, but if they connect you, if they transform you, then they are valid. But keep them alive. A ritual loses its power when it becomes automatic. That's why, from time to time, review your practice, feel if it still vibrates within you, and adjust it if necessary. Let it not become routine. Let it not lose its soul. Ritual is a living art, a dance between the visible and the invisible, and you are the choreographer. As the years pass, these rituals can become inner columns that sustain your deepest identity. When everything changes outside, when the body no longer responds the same, when loved ones are no longer there, when the rhythms of the world seem to accelerate, having a daily ritual can be like an inner compass that reminds you who you are, why you are here, and where you are going. It doesn't matter if you're at home, traveling, alone, or accompanied. The ritual goes with you because it is an extension of your consciousness. It is your way of telling the universe, I am awake. I am present. I am in communion with you. Ultimately, ritualizing life is a way of giving it back poetry. And poetry, as Grinberg said, is a path to the sacred, to that which cannot be explained but can be felt. Just as art touches parts of the soul that logical thought cannot reach, ritual activates zones of the being that have been asleep. That's why, if you feel your life has gone flat, if the days pass without flavor, if you're waiting for something without knowing what, maybe you don't need a big answer. Maybe you just need to light a candle. Close your eyes and remind yourself that you are alive, and that alone is sacred. At this point in the inner path, where we have learned to perceive differently, to honor the body, to meditate with intention, to cultivate conscious bonds, and to sustain energy through rituals, it becomes inevitable to face a dimension that many avoid, but that keeps silently beating in the background of the soul. Unexpressed pain, not to the past, the unspoken that inhabits us. In this subtle terrain, where emotional memory blends with deep identity, the sixth habit is revealed: forgiving from expanded consciousness. It is not about superficial forgiveness, done out of obligation or mere moral will. It is a forgiveness that comes from a broader, wiser place, more connected to the essential, a forgiveness that not only frees the other, but dissolves the chains that bind us to past realities and prevent us from manifesting our true energy. Jacobo Grinberg spoke of expanded consciousness as a state in which perception is no longer limited by the filters of the ego. From there, one can see the deep weaving of bonds, the hidden lessons and painful experiences, and even the invisible causes that led to certain encounters or separations. Forgiving from that perspective is not an act of weakness nor resignation. It is, on the contrary, an act of inner power, of alignment with a higher truth. It is to understand that the other, even in their unconsciousness or their wound, was part of your own learning field, a mirror that reflected unresolved parts of you, or even a necessary figure, so you could develop a certain level of awareness. This view doesn't justify harm, but transcends it. It doesn't deny pain, but doesn't turn it into identity. And above all, it allows you to let go without resentment, to close without grudge, and continue without the weight of what hasn't been healed. The key to this habit is not automatic forgiveness, but lucid forgiveness. You cannot forgive what you haven't looked at, what you haven't felt, what you haven't integrated. That's why the first step is to honor the pain. Acknowledge it, validate it. Say internally, yes, this hurt me, this wounded me, this marked me. Not to stay there, but so that the emotion feels seen, heard, recognized. The body stores memories. The neuronal field, as Grinberg clearly showed, registers every emotional impact as a vibratory imprint. If that imprint isn't expressed, it calcifies. And if it calcifies, it distorts perception, repeats patterns, generates symptoms. So forgiveness begins with the courage to feel, to return to the inner place where the wound occurred, and from an expanded state of consciousness, offer yourself what you couldn't give yourself then: understanding, compassion, support. Sometimes it's not about forgiving great betrayals, but releasing accumulated micro-pains, unspoken words, cold gestures, subtle abandonments, broken expectations. All these fragments form an invisible wall that separates your vital energy from your freest essence. Forgiving from expanded consciousness is starting to tear down that wall, brick by brick. And to do that, you don't necessarily need to speak with the other, nor gain their approval, nor have them change their version of events. It's enough to connect with yourself, with that inner space where you can see beyond the personal story, beyond roles, beyond masks. A powerful practice for cultivating this habit is conscious visualization of the energetic encounter. You can close your eyes, breathe deeply, and visualize in front of you the person you need to forgive, not from judgment nor reason, but from presence. Imagine both of you surrounded by a sphere of light. Observe their face, their posture, their energy, and from your heart, without forcing it, say, I release you from my judgments. I recognize the role you played in my path. I also recognize myself in you. Thank you for showing me what I needed to see. I release you in peace. Maybe you can't do it all at once. Maybe intense emotions arise at first. That's okay. Forgiveness isn't always immediate. It's a process. But every time you try with honesty, your energy field changes. Your body feels lighter. Your thoughts become clearer. And little by little, a part of you begins to stop identifying with the pain. Grinberg explained that when we identify too much with an experience, we stop perceiving the full field. We become blind to other possibilities. Resentment acts like that. It locks us in a single version of the past, traps us in a mental loop where the other is always guilty and we are always victims. That narrative might seem safe, but it keeps us from evolving. On the other hand, when we forgive from expanded consciousness, we are recognizing that every experience is part of a greater map, a map we don't fully control, but one we can learn to interpret. And that act of understanding changes our energy. The field perceives it. Life responds. It's also necessary to learn to forgive ourselves. Sometimes we're much harsher with ourselves than with others. We blame ourselves for past mistakes, for decisions made or not made, for staying silent when we should have spoken, or for acting without enough awareness. But carrying that guilt doesn't make us better. It wears us down. It fragments us. Forgiving oneself requires humility and tenderness. Looking at ourselves with the same eyes we'd use for a child who acted out of fear or ignorance. And telling ourselves with authenticity, I did what I could with the level of consciousness I had. Today I choose to learn not to punish myself. This type of declaration, if made from the heart, can be deeply healing. There are also deeper layers of forgiveness, those tied to the soul, not just the mind. These are forgivenesses that transcend this life, that touch transgenerational memories or even impressions from other existences. Sometimes we feel a pain or anger without knowing where it comes from, as if it didn't quite belong to our personal story. In those cases, forgiveness can take the form of an inner ceremony, where we open ourselves to releasing what we don't fully understand. The soul knows. The field responds. It's not always necessary to understand with logic. Sometimes it's enough to declare firmly, I renounce carrying this pain any longer. I release what does not belong to me. I open myself to peace. And then something inside begins to change, as if an ancient weight dissolved, as if a veil had lifted. The beauty of this habit is that it not only transforms the past, it clears the future. By forgiving, we make room for new experiences, freer, more luminous, more aligned with our true self. Because as long as we remain tied to unresolved stories, we'll keep recreating them, projecting them, repeating them. Grinberg said the neuronal field acts like an antenna that emits and receives according to its configuration. If the field is loaded with resentment, it will attract situations that validate it. If it's aligned with peace, it will manifest more harmonious experiences. That's why forgiveness is not just a moral or emotional act. It's an energetic reconfiguration. It's a way of telling the universe, I'm ready for something new. I'm available for reality more aligned with my essence. Forgiving from expanded consciousness is ultimately an act of love, not a naive or indulgent love, but a deep love that recognizes we are all in process, all learning, all carrying wounds. And sometimes the greatest gift we can offer to ourselves and the other is letting go of judgment, letting go of the story, letting go of the need for things to have been different, not because what happened was right, but because we no longer want to be hostages of what was, because we choose to be free, because we choose peace over ego. And then, from that choice, something starts to bloom inside, a lightness, a clarity, a new strength, as if by forgiving, a forgotten part of our soul returned home, as if by healing the unspoken, the body released an old tension, as if by letting go of resentment, we could finally breathe without weight, without fear, without armor. And that perhaps is one of the greatest forms of spirituality, allowing ourselves to be whole again, Who do you truly need to forgive, even if they never ask forgiveness? And what part of you still waits for an apology in order to be free? Write it without fear in the comments as a symbolic act of healing. Free yourself and help others do the same with your words. Having released the weight of the unspoken through conscious forgiveness, the inner space becomes cleaner and more receptive, like a newly tidied room inviting the window to be open and a different kind of air to flow in. That fresh breeze is the contact with the invisible, and in it the seventh habit is installed, to dialogue with the non-physical. For many people, this idea may sound esoteric or even absurd, but if we recall Jacobo Grinberg's premise, that reality is a result of the interaction between our neural field and a vast information network, it becomes coherent to suggest that there's a constant exchange between the visible and the unseen. Dialoguing with the non-physical does not mean losing touch with concrete reality, but expanding it. It implies recognizing that human perception encompasses more than the apparent, and that at that expanded level, we can receive guidance, intuitions, and support that transcend ordinary logic. From early ages, we often perceive glimpses of that dimension. Children speaking with imaginary friends, premonitions later confirmed, surprising synchronicities. However, as we grow up, rationalist education and cultural fear of the inexplicable close that door. At 60 or beyond, having passed through full cycles of work, family, and loss, the veil of the invisible grows thin again. The body ages and the psyche becomes more permeable. Consciousness, if not clinging to rigid certainties, begins to perceive subtleties. This biographical threshold is ideal for cultivating a genuine bond with non-physical dimensions. Inner guides, ancestors, the intelligence of dreams, the quantum self that inhabits possible futures. To avoid self-deception, it is crucial to anchor this dialogue in humility and discernment. Grinberg warned that the mind is capable of crafting convincing fantasies and projecting them as if they were external realities. That's why the first step is to establish a state of inner coherence before attempting communication. A few minutes of conscious breathing are enough, as we learned in the second habit, followed by centering the heart, feeling the heartbeat without forcing the mind in any direction. This rhythmic, grounded pulse acts as an energetic anchor and prevents imagination from running wild. Once centered, we can use simple yet profound techniques. One of the oldest is intuitive writing, with a notebook dedicated solely to this purpose. One silently formulates an open question. What do I need to understand today? How can I serve better? And writes whatever arises without filtering or judging. At first, the words may seem to come from the conscious mind, but with practice, a different voice becomes noticeable, calmer and wiser, with phrasing and metaphors foreign to usual speech. That voice may feel like a guide's, an inner teacher's, or one's higher self. What matters is not labeling it, but verifying the quality of the information. If it inspires deep peace, invites coherence, and does not contradict compassion, it likely comes from a broader level of consciousness, not a mere egoic desire. Another path is dream dialogue. For shamans and mystics, dreams have long been a privileged portal to other planes. Before sleeping, one can place a glass of water on the bedside table and softly declare the intention to receive guidance on a specific topic. Upon waking, the water is drunk as a gesture of symbolic integration, and any remembered image, emotion, or phrase is written down. With persistence, dreams grow more vivid and begin to answer questions. This practice aligns with Grinberg's findings on hypnagogic states, thresholds where the brain acts as a bridge between the physical and the subtle. The observation of signs is another form of dialogue. It's not about seeing omens in every coincidence, but cultivating open attention to the environment. A word overheard in passing, a song that keeps appearing, an image recurring in different contexts may work as winks from a field. The criterion, once again, is inner resonance. The sign produces an intimate click, a sense of this is for me. Over time, the symbolic reading sharpens and becomes a silent compass that guides important decisions. For those who feel affinity with their roots, there's the encounter with the ancestors. It can begin by lighting a candle and placing photographs of deceased loved ones, thanking aloud for the legacy received, and asking for guidance on a specific matter. Then one remains still, attentive to sensations, images, or memories that may arise. This dialogue does not imply idealizing ancestors or assuming they were infallible. It rather acknowledges that family memory lives in ourselves, and that by honoring it, we may resolve invisible loyalties or transgenerational wounds. A valuable resource is the silent retreat in natural settings. Spending 1 or 2 days without technology, walking slowly among trees or near water, opens perception to voices of the landscape, the whisper of the wind, the repeated call of bird like a mantra, the particular shape of a cloud. According to Grinberg, nature operates as a regulator of the human neuronal field. Its fractal coherence induces states of consciousness where it becomes easier to feel interconnection with all that exists. In that state, questions dissolve and answers arise as instantaneous understandings without words. Whatever technique is chosen, the pillar is the attitude of respect. The non-physical is not at our disposal to satisfy trivial curiosity or to confirm rigid beliefs. It is a realm of autonomous consciousness that responds best to sincerity, gratitude, and willingness to serve a greater good. The ego, if it tries to use these practices to feed its importance, will receive confusing mirrors or become trapped in fantasies. That's why, after each session, it is helpful to land a brief note on what was experienced, a deep breath, a glass of water, a simple, earthly activity like watering a plant or folding clothes. In this way, the experience is integrated and dissociation is avoided. It is essential to remember that dialoguing with the non-physical does not replace discernment or personal responsibility. If an internal message incites fear, separation, or acts contrary to ethics, it is a sign of distortion. Grinberg insisted that expanded consciousness leads to greater coherence, compassion, and respect for life. That is a measure for evaluating any guidance received. When this habit is cultivated consistently, the whole life becomes a conversation. Synchronicities increase. Decisions flow with less doubt. The body reacts before the mind understands, like a seismograph that detects subtle tremors of future reality. Many people report that, thanks to this dialogue, they overcome ancient fears, find renewed purpose, or feel loving companionship in moments of solitude. There is no guarantee of spectacle, but there is of depth, a feeling of being supported by a vast intelligence operating behind the chaotic appearance of the world. With time, the practitioner discovers that the non-physical is not out there, but in a simultaneous dimension of their own consciousness. The inner guide, the ancestor, the dream voice are expressions of the same unitary field manifesting the form that best nurtures the evolutionary moment. This understanding dismantles the separation between spiritual world and material world. Everything is one fabric of energy and information, and our task is to refine perception to read it clearly. Thus, by dialogue with the non-physical, we do not escape reality. We complete it. We do not reject rational logic. We frame it within a broader context. We become, as Grinberg suggested, explorers of consciousness, cartographers of invisible territories whose discovery brings meaning and coherence to daily life. Old age, then, ceases to be a closure and becomes an age of good listening, the moment to hear what is always whispered behind the noise of hurry. In that inhabited silence, each breath ceases to be mere oxygen exchange and becomes a yes to the whole. Each step feels accompanied, even if no one is around. Each challenge is perceived as a call to awaken an internal resource previously ignored. And death, the inescapable horizon in these years, loses part of its shadow, for contact with the non-physical suggests that consciousness does not end with the last heartbeat. It simply changes frequency, continues a dialogue through other channels. Practicing this habit requires no special gifts or shamanic lineages. It demands, above all, honesty and perseverance. It requires remembering, day after day, that reality is vaster than we were told, and that intuition is a sense as legitimate as sight or hearing. It also requires the courage to accept that the answers may contradict our comforts and push us to live with greater integrity. But that risk brings an immeasurable reward. The intimate certainty that we are never alone, that we are part of a network of consciousness that sustains and guides, that life has a secret pulse we can learn to hear. By integrating dialogue with the non-physical, we open an inner space where perception becomes broader, the mind more flexible, and the soul feels accompanied on its path. This deep contact with invisible dimensions prepares us for the next step in this journey. understanding how time and purpose transform after 60, and how we can reprogram the sense of mission to live this stage with fullness, meaning, and authenticity. The 8th habit, which we now present, is precisely that: reprogramming the sense of mission. Reaching 60 or more is for many an ambivalent experience. On one hand, achievements, memories, and experiences accumulate, shaping a rich and complex identity. On the other, society often projects images of decline, passivity, or withdrawal onto the stage. This cultural narrative greatly limits how we may feel about the time we have left. However, the spiritual biography of someone who has cultivated expanded awareness and dialogue with the invisible knows that time is not a straight line nor an inexorable countdown, but a dynamic opportunity to unfold new ways of being and doing. Reprogramming the sense of mission consists in unlearning the inherited pattern of slowing down and replacing it with an approach of renewed vitality, applied wisdom, and genuine service. The first step in this reprogramming is recognizing that purpose does not disappear with age. It transforms. Many people tend to associate purpose with tangible productivity or specific goals defined in youth: building a career, forming a family, acquiring assets. These goals often respond to an external success scheme, but upon entering this new stage, the possibility opens of seeking a deeper purpose, one that arises from within and is connected to authenticity beyond appearance or social roles. This renewed purpose is nourished by all that has been lived, yes, but also attuned to expanded awareness, intuition, and the understanding that each action, however small, can be an act of profound meaning. The key to reprogramming the mission lies in self-recognition and radical honesty. Many cling to ideals or images of the past that no longer correspond to their current reality, generating frustration and demotivation. This habit invites us to pause and make a sincere review. What things still nourish me? What activities make me feel alive, connected, at peace? What unresolved wounds can I heal to release creative energy? The answers to these questions often lead to a redefinition that does not mean abandoning dreams, but adjusting them to be viable and true in this new chapter. In parallel, reprogramming the sense of mission requires unlearning limiting beliefs that still resonate strongly. It's too late to change. My contribution has no value. I'm not as important as before. These ideas are echoes of the fear of death or oblivion, and often keep us trapped in comfort zones disguised as resignation. The conscious work is to dismantle those myths through the observation of contrary evidence. Real-life stories of people who began meaningful projects after 60, cases of deep personal transformation, and the recognition that accumulated wisdom is an invaluable resource for any mission. Another key aspect is connecting personal purpose with a greater sense of service. Jacobo Grinberg spoke of the neural field as an interconnected network where individual well-being impacts collective reality. Reprogramming the mission means shifting from selfishness to conscious contribution, understanding that our experience and energy can illuminate the path for others. This change of focus transforms perception of time. It stops being a finite resource and becomes a sacred space where each instant offers a possibility to contribute, heal, or inspire. To put this reprogramming into practice, it is helpful to build a clear and concrete vision of what we wish to manifest. Often, vagueness generates paralysis or dispersion. Therefore, it is recommended to set realistic goals that also spark enthusiasm and emotional connection. These goals need not be large or public. They can be intimate and simple, like writing a letter to a loved one, learning an artistic technique, devoting daily time to deep meditation, or getting involved in a community project that resonates with personal values. At the same time, reprogramming the sense of mission does not exclude rest or acceptance of personal limits. On the contrary, integrating self-care as part of purpose is an act of self-love and responsibility. Recognizing the body's signals, respecting natural rhythms, and allowing moments of pause strengthens the energy needed to carry out the mission with clarity and sustainability. This balance between activity and rest is a lesson learned through experience and is a pillar in this stage of life. A helpful resource for this transformation is a practice of conscious self-dialogue. This consists of setting aside regular moments to dialogue with oneself from a place of attentive and loving presence, questioning beliefs, exploring desires, and assessing progress toward the reprogrammed purpose. Through this habit, the mind aligns with the heart and body, generating internal coherence that facilitates accurate decisions and meaningful actions. Writing, silent reflection, or even conversation with a trusted companion can enhance this process. In addition, reprogramming the sense of mission is strengthened by integrating past learning without getting trapped in it. Memory can be a valuable resource if used as a source of lessons and not as a prison of regrets or guilt. In this sense, cultivating a compassionate view toward oneself is key, recognizing that every mistake, every fall, has contributed to evolution and that the present always offers a new blank page. This perspective opens a way to reconcile with personal history and move forward with lightness. From the spiritual perspective, reprogramming the mission also means connecting with a transcendent purpose. This can take very diverse forms depending on each person's beliefs. Feeling part of a divine plan, collaborating with collective evolution, manifesting an essential truth, or simply living with integrity and authenticity. What matters is that the expanded purpose contains a calling that mobilizes the being in all its dimensions and offers meaning in the face of the uncertainty inherent to the future. A practical element to sustain this reprogramming is the creation of a renewed life map, where different areas of interest are visualized and priorities established that reflect the new purpose. This map is not a rigid plan, but a flexible guide that can be adjusted as circumstances and learnings evolve. Creating it requires time, patience, and inner listening, but it brings clarity and direction, avoiding dispersion or the feeling of emptiness that sometimes accompanies retirement or stepping away from traditional roles. It is also valuable to surround oneself with people who support this new stage with respect and enthusiasm. The company of those who recognize and value the transformation helps strengthen confidence and motivation. Likewise, interacting with younger generations can be a source of inspiration and reciprocity, while sharing experiences with peers in similar processes offers support and encouragement. This conscious relational fabric enriches the mission and sustains it during moments of doubt or difficulty. Finally, reprogramming the sense of mission invites us to cultivate an attitude of openness toward life and its mysteries. By accepting that not everything is under our control, and that time is a dimension that can expand through consciousness, a way of inhabiting the present with greater fullness unfolds. This state of openness fosters creativity, gratitude, and deep joy, qualities that enrich every step of the journey and are the true legacy we can offer. In sum, the 8th habit, reprogramming the sense of mission, is a call to reinvent ourselves from accumulated wisdom, to channel vital energy in directions that resonate with the soul, and to live with a purpose that transcends mere physical existence. It's not about doing more just to do more, but about doing with intention, with presence, and with love. It is about integrating knowledge of the invisible, respect for the body, and expanded awareness to weave a life that shines with authentic meaning and spreads light to those around us. This reprogramming is ultimately an invitation to recognize that after 60, life does not shrink or fade. It transforms into a rich, deep, and luminous experience where time becomes an ally and purpose a beacon that guides with clarity. This step, when taken with an open heart and flexible mind, marks the beginning of a new cycle of fullness and expansion. Having already explored 8 fundamental habits for spiritual and physical well-being after the age of 60, we now approach the close of this inner journey with the presentation of a habit that acts as the backbone, the guiding thread that unites and enhances everything learned. This 9th habit, which culminates this process of conscious transformation, is essential to sustain the full experience at this stage of life and beyond. We speak of radically trusting in the mystery. This trust is not a naive or passive act, but a deep attitude that embraces uncertainty, complexity, and the wonder of existence as an inseparable part of the path. To radically trust in the mystery means to accept that there are dimensions of life, of our being, and the cosmos that transcend rational understanding, that escape logic and cannot be fully controlled or predicted. For many, especially in a culture dominated by the materialist scientific paradigm, this acceptance may seem disconcerting or even threatening. However, ancient wisdom and spiritual traditions agree that recognizing the mystery is not resignation, but an opening to a richer and more expansive experience of reality. In the context of 60 and beyond, this trust becomes a powerful tool to navigate with serenity the changes of body, mind, and spirit, and to continue walking with purpose and meaning. This attitude of radical trust invites us to let go of the absolute control we have tried to exert over our lives, plans, and outcomes. For decades, it is common for us to strive to build an orderly, predictable, and secure life. But the experience of time, the appearance of the unexpected, the encounter with aging, and the nearness of finitude clearly reveal that control is a partial illusion. The mystery is always there with its surprises, its cycles of light and shadow, its silences and revelations. Trusting this mystery does not imply being passive or ceasing to act. On the contrary, it allows us to act from a place of greater inner freedom, without clinging to fixed results and with openness to adapt and learn. This radical trust is also an act of deep humility, recognizing that we do not know everything, that we cannot master everything, connects us with ultimate reality, and frees us from the weight of absolute self-sufficiency. In accepting the mystery, we come into contact with a greater wisdom that transcends ego and its thirst for power. This humility is liberating because it opens a heart to the experience of being the flow of life, with its unpredictable movements and its intrinsic beauty. In this sense, to trust radically in the mystery is to embrace life as it is, in all its complexity and fullness. In practicing this habit, a special sensitivity is developed to recognize the subtle signals life offers us, whether synchronicities, intuitions, meaningful encounters, or moments of clarity. Trust in the mystery makes us more receptive to these manifestations that guide and orient us, even when they do not match our logic or expectations. It is an openness toward the unknown that is lived with respect and curiosity, without fear or the need for absolute certainties. This openness expands awareness and connects us with the universal energy field Grinberg described, a web where every consciousness interacts and co-creates reality. This habit is particularly relevant for those going through a stage after 60 years, since at this stage the relationship with life, death, and meaning becomes more explicit and close. Radical trust in the mystery offers spiritual support in the face of fear of the unknown and attachment to the material or the visible. It helps us understand that the end of the cycle is simply the prelude to a new form of existence, that the essence of being transcends temporal forms, and that life continues in ways the ordinary mind cannot easily grasp. This trust then allows us to live with greater serenity, without clinging either to lost youth or to social expectations, but from a deep acceptance of the present and the path yet to be walked. The daily practice of this habit can take many forms, and it is not about seeking proof or external evidence, but about cultivating an internal attitude of surrender and openness. For example, in moments of uncertainty or difficulty, instead of resisting or worrying excessively, we can remember that the mystery contains possibilities we cannot yet imagine, and that every experience is an opportunity to grow and learn. This perspective transforms fear into curiosity and anxiety into active trust. It is not about passively waiting for things to happen, but about acting with the best intention and ability, knowing that the outcome is in the hands of the mystery. In addition, to trust radically in the mystery implies recognizing the deep interconnection that exists among all beings and phenomena. It makes us aware that our life is not an isolated matter, but part of a universal web where each action reverberates through the whole. This awareness of unity fosters a sense of loving responsibility toward ourselves, others, and the planet. It urges us to live more consciously, to respect diversity, and to contribute with small or large gestures that honor this connection. Trust in the mystery sustains us in the face of the apparent fragility of the world and inspires us to be agents of positive transformation. In this sense, radical trust is also a bridge between spirituality and ethical action. It is not about escaping the world to seek an inner refuge, but about engaging from a broad awareness, recognizing complexity and challenges without losing hope or capacity to love. This balance between surrender and commitment is an art cultivated over time and practice, and becomes a form of lived wisdom. Thus, trusting in the mystery is not a passive act, but a way of being fully present in the world with authenticity and courage. It is important to emphasize that this radical trust does not imply giving up reason or critical capacity. Rather, it is a complement that integrates the rational mind with intuition and direct experience. When the mind faces the inexplicable, instead of shutting down or rejecting it, it can open to new perspectives, explore possibilities, and accept that reality is multifaceted and constantly transforming. This mental flexibility strengthens resilience and facilitates adaptation to the changes that life inevitably brings, especially in the advanced stage. Another relevant aspect of this habit is the practice of detachment. Detaching does not mean indifference or renouncing love or desire, but freeing the mind from the slavery of rigid attachment to outcomes or people. Trust in the mystery sustains this conscious detachment, as it reminds us that everything is in flow and that clinging only generates suffering. This detachment allows us to live with greater lightness, fully enjoying the present without fear of loss, without resistance to change or impermanence. From human experience, those who have cultivated this trust often manifest a deep serenity and a sense of peace that does not depend on external circumstances. This peace is a direct fruit of recognizing that life is a sacred mystery, that our essence is eternal, and that each moment is a unique gift to unfold love, awareness, and presence. Thus, the habit of radically trusting the mystery becomes a spiritual practice that transcends words and ideas, and is experienced in the body, the mind, and the heart. This practice also opens the door to wonder and awe, qualities often lost in routine and familiarity. Trusting in the mystery connects us with spiritual childhood, with that ability to be amazed by life, by natural cycles, by the diversity of experiences, and by our own existence. This connection with wonder revitalizes the soul, renews energy, and allows one to face aging with a fresh and vibrant attitude, where each day is an opportunity to discover something new. Finally, radical trust in the mystery invites us to celebrate life in all its fullness, with its lights and shadows, with its certainties and enigmas. It reminds us that existence does not need to be fully understood to be deeply loved and honored. This acceptance transforms our relationship with time, with the body, with emotions and relationships, as it frees us from a need for control and opens us to fluidity and spontaneity. In summary, this ninth habit is a synthesis and culmination of the entire journey. Radically trusting in the mystery is an act of courage, humility, and love that sustains life after 60 and beyond. It is the key that opens the doors of inner peace, deep acceptance, and connection with the ultimate source of all being. Integrating this trust allows all other habits to flourish in harmony, providing integral well-being that transcends body and mind to touch the soul in its fullest and freest expression. As we conclude this journey through spiritual habits that can transform life after the age of 60, a profound reflection arises that invites us to look beyond the habits themselves, toward a dimension we often avoid or fear, but which is fundamental for a full and conscious life: death. From the perspective of Jacobo Grinberg in his proposal on consciousness, death is not an absolute end or definitive rupture, but a transition, a natural and subtle continuation of the process of consciousness that has inhabited the physical body. Understanding death as a conscious transition opens a space to prepare ourselves with clarity, acceptance, and inner expansion, and to recognize the power of detachment and the energetic legacy we leave beyond the body. Grinberg proposed that consciousness is a phenomenon that transcends physical and material boundaries, and that the body is only a temporary manifestation within a larger energy field. From this view, death is not disappearance, but a change of state or transition to another level of existence. This understanding implies that life does not end with the body's disappearance, but that consciousness continues in other dimensions, perhaps less visible to ordinary senses, but equally real and meaningful. This spiritual perspective invites us to detach from the fear of death, which often arises from ignorance and exclusive identification with the physical form. Preparing the soul for this crucial moment is an act of clarity and courage, a conscious decision to fully live the process of farewell without clinging or resisting. Accepting death as a natural part of existence allows each moment to be valued in its true dimension, for surrender to be conscious, and for the ego, with its fears and desires, to slowly dissolve to make way for the purest essence of being. This path is not linear or easy, but those who walk it with openness experience a sense of deep peace and connection with something greater that transcends the limitations of time and space. Detachment is a key tool in this preparation. To detach does not mean to renounce life or affections, but to release the control and resistance that generates suffering and blockage. It is to free the soul from bonds that keep it imprisoned in patterns of fear, guilt, or material attachments. Conscious detachment opens a space for inner freedom, for the expansion of awareness, and for the encounter with the true spiritual nature that dwells in each of us. This inner freedom is the greatest gift that can be cultivated in the stage after 60 years, as it prepares the soul for the transition with serenity and dignity. The energetic legacy is another fundamental aspect revealed in this perspective. Beyond material possessions or memories, each person leaves an energetic imprint on the world, a set of vibrations, emotions, teachings, and love that continues influencing their surroundings and those around them. This legacy is not measured in quantity but in quality and depth, and it is built from the coherence between what is lived and what one is. Recognizing the value of this legacy encourages us to live with more authenticity and responsibility, to sow seeds that endure beyond physical passage, and to honor the interconnection among all life forms. Transcendence beyond the body is the ultimate experience that accompanies conscious transition. This transcendence is not an abstract concept or a distant promise, but a direct and tangible experience of those who cultivate inner expansion. It manifests as a state of full presence, of unity with the whole, and of unconditional love that dissolves the boundaries of the limited self. In this state, death reveals itself as a threshold to new ways of being and existing, as a doorway to dimensions of consciousness that remain invisible to the ordinary mind, but accessible to intuition and deep spiritual experience. This reflective closing honors life after 60 not as a countdown or a stage of losses, but as a profound act of wisdom, integration, and surrender. Every experience, every relationship, every challenge lived along the way becomes an essential piece of the great mosaic that we are. Spiritual maturity opens a door to recognizing the beauty and meaning in each moment, to embracing with gratitude what has been lived, and to letting go with love what must transcend. This process is an act of great courage and value, a conscious surrender that allows the inner light to shine more intensely at sunset and inspire others to walk their own path with dignity and hope. Thus, seeing death as a conscious transition transforms our relationship with life itself, giving us the opportunity to live with more fullness, presence, and serenity. It invites us to leave behind the fears and conditionings that limit us, to open a heart to total experience, and to honor the continuity of consciousness beyond forms. In this deep understanding, life after 60 becomes a sacred stage of spiritual growth, in which each day is an opportunity to expand awareness, to heal the unspoken, and create a legacy of love and wisdom that transcends time. Ultimately, beyond the habits, this reflective closing connects us with the very essence of what we are and what we have always been. Eternal consciousness, traveler mystery, conscious participant in the infinite dance of existence. Preparing the soul for death with clarity and acceptance is, then, the supreme act of love toward ourselves and toward life. It is a final step on a path of self-discovery that invites us to let go with trust, to surrender with gratitude, and to be reborn in each instant into the immensity of the mystery. After having traveled together through these 9 spiritual habits that can transform life after 60, it is important to pause for a brief recap that helps us integrate and remember the main teachings we have explored. This recap not only summarizes the content, but also invites us to reaffirm personal commitment to the path of expanded awareness, integral well-being, and deep connection with ourselves and with the mystery that inhabits everything. The first habit we saw was reconstructing perception with expanded awareness. Here the invitation was to look beyond usual patterns, to question limiting beliefs, and to open a new inner map through conscious, non-judgmental observation. Jacobo Grinberg reminds us that perception is not a fixed reality, but a dynamic process, shaped by our attention and inner states. Reconstructing perception means expanding our view to discover hidden dimensions of reality and of our being. The second habit, conscious breathing as silent prayer, invited us to connect with the vital force through full and attentive breathing. Breathing consciously is a simple yet powerful practice that anchors our mind in the present and opens subtle channels of energy and deep calm. Breathing, understood as silent prayer, helps us to rediscover the natural rhythm of life and to remain centered in states of inner peace, so necessary especially in the mature stage. Thirdly, the habit meditate to empty, not to fill proposed meditation that does not seek to accumulate thoughts, images, or expectations, but that focuses on emptiness, on the deep silence where the mind quiets and consciousness expands. This emptiness is not absence but fullness from non-doing, from presence without labels or filters. Meditating to empty is a training to release mental noise and open ourselves to the direct experience of being. The fourth habit, cultivating energetically conscious relationships, was an invitation to view relationships from a deeper level, as soul mirrors and channels of energetic exchange. At this stage of life, relationships acquire a particularly sacred dimension, as they reflect our inner state and encourage us to grow in empathy, compassion, and authenticity. Cultivating conscious relationships means recognizing and respecting the energy that flows in each encounter, avoiding codependency, and promoting freedom and genuine love. The fifth habit, creating personal rituals of connection, showed us the importance of establishing sacred moments to reconnect with ourselves and with the mystery. Rituals are not mere customs or automatic habits, but conscious acts that anchor us in the present, nourish the soul, and build a bridge between the everyday and the transcendent. Creating personal rituals is a way to honor life and to sustain spiritual expansion day by day. The sixth habit, forgiving from expanded awareness, invited us to release emotional burdens and wounds that weigh on our energetic field. Conscious forgiveness is not a concession or forced forgetting, but a profound act of inner healing that allows us to let go of the past, ease suffering, and open ourselves to freedom and authentic love. This forgiveness is a door to peace and reconciliation with ourselves and with others. The seventh habit, dialoguing with the non-physical, introduced us to the practice of connecting with invisible dimensions of reality, with intuition, with spiritual guides, or the inner wisdom that transcends a logical mind. This dialogue is a bridge between the tangible and the intangible, a path to nourish ourselves from deep sources of knowledge and to experience the continuity of consciousness beyond the body. The eighth habit, reprogramming the sense of mission, invited us to rethink life's purpose in this stage of maturity, recognizing that time after 60 is an opportunity to embrace a renewed sense of mission, more aligned with accumulated wisdom and spiritual expansion. Reprogramming the sense of mission is opening to life with new questions and answers, with humility and courage, giving the best of oneself for the common good and personal growth. Finally, the ninth habit, radically trusting the mystery, took us to the very core of spiritual experience. Surrender and absolute trust in that which we cannot control or fully understand. Trusting the mystery is releasing control, embracing uncertainty, and opening the heart to life as it is, with all its paradoxes and wonders. This habit is the one that unifies and sustains all the others, because without deep trust there is no true expansion or inner peace. After this brief recap, it is worth bringing one final reflection from the wisdom of Jacobo Grinberg, who left us a powerful thought that resonates strongly at any stage of life, but takes on special meaning after age 60. There is no age to awaken, but there are ages when awakening becomes urgent. This phrase holds a clear and urgent invitation not to postpone the path of consciousness and spiritual growth. It doesn't matter how many years we have lived or the external circumstances we face. Inner awakening is always possible. But there are moments when it becomes a vital need, a call that cannot be ignored without endangering deep well-being and the fullness of being. For those who have reached this stage, the urgency of awakening is marked by the awareness of finitude, by the desire to leave an authentic legacy, by the need to reconcile with oneself and with the mystery. It is a time to be brave and honor the opportunity life offers to expand awareness and live with greater presence, love, and wisdom. Grinberg reminds us that awakening is not an isolated event or a distant goal, but a continuous process, a daily practice that can transform each moment and open us to new realities. As we close this journey together, I want to invite you to make sure this knowledge does not remain just words or a text, but becomes a living force in your everyday life. May the 9 habits we have explored accompany and inspire you to create a life after 60 full of meaning, presence, and expansion. May Jacobo Grinberg's reflection inspire you to awaken now, here, and always, because the mystery of life awaits us with open arms and the invitation to discover the deepest part of our being. If this content resonated with you and you wish to continue this path of growth and awareness, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the upcoming entries, to give a like so more people can discover these teachings, and to share it with those you think could benefit from this light and wisdom. Your participation is very valuable, and together we can create a conscious community that supports and grows in love and knowledge. Before saying goodbye, I would love to read your comment. Leave me a phrase that represents your current state or your commitment to spiritual awakening. That phrase will be a beacon that lights our shared path and will also be the doorway for you to receive a special greeting in the next video. The key word to receive this greeting is light. Write it along with your phrase, and I will make you an active part of this community of expanding souls. Thank you for accompanying me on this deep and transformative journey. Remember that age doesn't matter. Awakening is always within reach, and each step we take toward awareness is a step toward freedom and fulfillment. Until next time, where we'll continue exploring together the mystery and magic of life. Namaste.